Szanowni Państwo, witam z powrotem. Maksymilian Wysocki. Dbamy o wartość polskiego pieniądza, dbamy też o wartość merytoryczną, a także o to, żeby Państwo mieli okazję posłuchać tego, co mają do powiedzenia również najlepsi zagraniczni, międzynarodowi eksperci. Teraz się przełączymy na język angielski, ponieważ our guest today is Professor John H. Cochrane, Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford.
Jeff Gottlieb, the International Monetary Fund's Senior Regional Representative for Central Eastern and Southeastern Europe.
Dr Sergij Nikolajczuk, wiceprezes Banku Narodowego Ukrainy.
Dzień dobry.
With us, hopefully, is Mr. Jamie Bogan. Hello, sir.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody.
Mr. Jamie Bogan is a Relationship Director, Economic and Monetary Policy Institute, OMFIF. Professor Richard B. Freeman, Herbert Asherman's Chair in Economics at Harvard University and Faculty Co-Director of the Center for Labor and Just Economy at Harvard Law School. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning.
Arumina Sharan from Official Monetary and Financial Institutions Forum. Hello.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hi there. Taylor Pierce, starsza ekonomistka w OMFIF, czyli Official Monetary and Financial Institutions Forum. I się przełączamy na język angielski. Hello, Taylor.
Hi. Good to
Hi.
This is the beginning and it's a firm trend to build the two-block world, one focusing around US and its trade and one focusing around China and its trade.
In fact, we have seen a rise in trade among countries of similar political values. We've also seen a rise in capital flows among countries with similar values. And it's clear that there can be winners and losers on a relative basis on this. So some countries may stand to gain more than others, but on the whole, we see it as negative for economic growth with large output losses if it is sustained and intensified. The Eurozone has faced challenges with economic growth for some time.
And observe two things in Europe, I think. One is the exodus of business from the European Union. That is because of the green transformation and its cost, the costs of energy, which will rise and rise. So the businesses are looking for places for their production outside the EU. And second is that the efficiency of business of production in Europe is decreasing compared to the US. So those might be two challenges that might be very difficult for Europe to tackle.
What we consistently emphasize is the fastest rate of growth that is sustainable, and sustainability is partially a narrow economic concept of doing it in a way that doesn't cause inflation or excessive deficits, but it's also from a resource use concept. And Europe has made good progress on climate. The issue is finding a way to do so with the least cost for economic growth. And I think that is something where it's important to streamline the way in which it's going about rather than abandoning the focus on climate altogether.
You often emphasize the importance of fiscal policy in determining inflation, which is very interesting. What is mostly interesting is your opinions that inflation is fundamentally determined by fiscal policy rather than monetary policy alone.
Pretty much all inflations have come from governments printing up money or debts that they can't repay in order to cover deficits. So the fiscal theory of the price level just takes this very simple intuition. If the government has borrowed a lot of money and people don't trust that they'll be able to pay it back, then people try to get rid of government debt. They try to buy stuff and drive up the prices of goods and services. And whether the government gives you money or whether the government gives you interest-paying debt that everybody knows it can't pay back doesn't really matter that much. So that's the fundamental force driving inflation. Central banks are important. They guide the path of inflation. They can manipulate inflation. But if the government is running big deficits and people don't trust it will be repaid, there's not much that central banks can do. And that's the heart of the fiscal theory of the price level. As you mentioned, I worked in finance. price is present value of dividends, is the sort of number one way we understand asset prices. So the fiscal theory just applies the same idea to governments. The value of the government's debt is the value of what people think they'll get back for it, just as the value of a stock is the value of what people think they'll get back for it. And if people lose that faith, they try to sell, and the stock price goes down, or the value of the money goes down, meaning the price of everything else goes up.
Fiscal policy, the monetary policy won't be enough, right?
That's right. That's right. If a government is unable to finance its deficits, then sooner or later it's going to end up printing money to finance those deficits. And people understanding that that will happen in the future try to get rid of government debt today, so the inflation breaks out when people see that coming.
In your works, you often critique conventional monetary theories that focus solely on the central bank's role in controlling inflation through the interest rates adjustments. Why, in your opinion, these theories overlook the significant impact of fiscal policy on inflation dynamics?
Well, I don't want to deny that central banks are important. So where central banks set interest rates is important to understanding inflation, but it isn't everything. No matter what central banks do, when there is a big fiscal shock, as we saw in COVID, you're going to get inflation. You ask why? Let's be charitable. All economists, good economic models simplify. So you leave out all sorts of stuff that isn't important to the story you want to tell. And there was a desire to produce a theory in which central banks are all important and have complete power over inflation, and that turns out not to be true.
Yeah, that's quite interesting and intriguing that in Scotland, first time for many years, there won't be a political force that will be, going for the independence. So that's one thing. The other thing is those important yet personal internal matters that made a difference. But I wanted to ask you a question about the public view of Brexit. Did it change? Because, those stop the boats, we would say that, not much has changed. How's it look? Does this look that way? What's the true story here?
Yes, I think plenty of people have sympathy with the point of view you've just expressed. I think largely it's seen as not having been a success. I think even those that voted for it at the time haven't been very happy with the way it's been implemented. So Boris Johnson, back in his time in office, came along and said he had an oven ready, as he called it, deal to get Brexit done, to get it finalised, to get an agreement in place. He got it through, which I think many people were pleased with, just to get it done with, and off the political agenda. It dominated UK politics for so many years by that stage, and had seen off Theresa May. She left office having not really been seen to be able to complete the job of implementing Brexit. So Boris came along and said he had an oven-ready deal. So got it through. There was an agreement in place, but I think, as I say, even those who voted Brexit, I don't think are very pleased with how it's turned out. But I think it's one of those issues that, there's so much to it, and it's just so wide, with so many different aspects to the deal across all parts of life, that it would be so difficult to implement in a fashion which pleases everybody. I think it's still one of those issues which not many people are happy with. Almost half of the electorate, as you know, voted against in the first instance anyway. I think of those that voted in favour, a lot of those, or a large number of those, aren't happy with how it's been implemented, and also a large number have also changed their mind from voting in favour of it in the first instance. So it remains a big thing. And you have people in the political system like Nigel Farage, who for years and years campaigned in favour of Brexit. He then got his wish when Brexit was voted for and came along. He then lost any sense of purpose because Brexit had come about. So he invented a new party, the Reform Party, in 2018, and he actually won a seat.
He gained some votes.
He did. So, as I say, Reform as a party got 14%, which is an enormous share for a party only formed in 2018. That amounted, as discussed, only to less than 1% of the overall number of seats. But I think what many people felt a bit cheesed off about was the fact that the area which he now represents, Clacton-on-Sea in Essex, was an area which many thought had suffered at the hands of Brexit, had become poorer, jobs had been lost. So in his shoes, having brought about Brexit in the first instance, and many people think the country is now poorer, and a lot of the numbers show that it's been a net loss, Brexit, 5 years on. For Nigel Farage to then come about and turn up in a place like Clacton, which he now represents, which has suffered from Brexit, to now paint himself as a hero to turn around their fortunes. I think many people felt that was a bit much. Nonetheless, he won the vote, so he is now the MP for Clacton, which I think some people think is a bit too much.
So they're very interesting to watch.
Yes, sorry, but
Yes.
so long story short, Great Britain is poorer after Brexit, and this is what.
You can interpret it in any number of ways, but I think the numbers show that economically it's a net loss.
Yes, just the last question, since we have a minute or a minute and a half. As considering the Bank of England, how does tackling the inflation look in UK?
Yes, well, inflation is coming down. So I think largely we're on the right path from the highs of about 10% 2 years ago. So I think consensus is it's slowly moving in the right direction. But Rachel Reeves, I think, is very careful to avoid misstepping. And it's something she certainly is going to be watching very closely. We at OMFIF have close ties with the Bank of England, so we'll be running various sessions with the Bank of England, looking at some of these issues and others over the course of the next 9 months or so. So watch this space, and let's hope for all our sakes that it lands in around about the right place.
Fingers crossed. Thank you very much. Why is there this disproportion, this inequality rising on the national levels?
I would say it's again this issue of ownership. If the new technologies are creating wonderful new businesses, and the ownership of those companies and those assets is in the hands of a small number of people, then those small number of people will get more and more income. And I'm very much in favor of greater spread of the ownership of capital. Capitalism should be for everyone, not just for a couple of billionaires and trillionaires. Well, we haven't got a trillionaire yet, but multi-billionaires.
Yes, but how to do this?
Well, that requires some politics. It requires unions can do something. In the U.S., of course, the unions are not strong enough to do that much at this moment. And it does require, therefore, government to do some redistribution, but I think of it as redistribution of the basic ownership in the country. And that means putting much greater stress and much on enterprises that are owned by workers and enterprises that share their stocks with their workers. And there is a movement in the U.S. toward that. We've always had some of that. And actually, we've been, very strangely, we've been, on one level, the most socialist country among the advanced countries, because we have a lot more employee ownership than almost any other country. But it's always been, it's about 10% of American workers are in employee-owned firms. And there's got to be a greater spread of the ownership of capital.
So those two are the next wide topics you really put a lot of time and effort to study and research. One is the workers' company ownership, and the second is the unions and its and productivity. So when we are talking about the company ownership, what have you, along your research, what have you discovered with that model of making business?
Basically, the worker-owned firms tend to do a little bit better than regular firms because obviously the workers are more concerned about making the company succeed. There's no division of capital versus labor. They are the capital. And so they do a bit better. But if they're getting into a fight or in a market, not a fist fight, but with some giant enterprise owned by a few rich people, or owned by capital in the U.S. is, I don't know how it is in Poland, is owned by pension funds of workers. But workers don't vote their pension fund shares. Their pension fund shares are voted by Wall Street characters who are worried only about the pension fund monies, not so much about how the company is being governed, let's say. So there has to be some change in those ways of. It's not an even balance, I would say, between the employee-owned firms, even though they do a little bit better than other firms. If they did twice as good, you'd see them growing massively. But of course, they don't do twice as good. They do somewhat better, and that's enough to favor them.
Gender Balance Index 2024. What are the key findings? But what does it consider? What was the survey about?
Sure. So, as a background, this is the 11th year that we've published the Gender Balance Index. And the aim of the index is to track the presence of women and men in senior leadership positions across different financial institutions. This year, the main story is one of missed opportunities. We found that across all of these institutions, 63 of them appointed new leaders, so new governors, new CEOs over the past year. And out of 63, only 9 were women, which is about 14%. So that shows that there's a lot of scope and gap for more progress, but this past year was just one of missed opportunities to move the needle on gender balance as much as we could have.
Let's take it from the top. Let's start with the general executive summary.
Sure. So a bit of background about what went into the report this year. Prior to the pandemic, we, from running our survey, saw a trend toward diversification of reserve assets among central bank reserve managers. So this meant going beyond traditional government bond and gold holdings to a wider array of asset classes to include equities, ETFs, corporate bonds, and even in some cases real estate for central banks. Those became investable assets. And this was due to lower for longer interest rates in that macro environment. After the pandemic and successive inflationary episodes and external shocks, we saw over the past 2 years a flight to safety and a wait-and-see approach. So central bank reserve managers became much more conservative and were more likely to be invested in traditional reserve asset classes and safe haven currencies like the US dollar. We were curious this year to see, now that we're exiting the acute crisis of the pandemic shock, the shock of the war in Ukraine, as well as the inflationary episode as a result of the energy prices skyrocketing. We were curious to see what that would mean for central bank strategies. And what we see is that they are looking to diversify at the margins in the safest way possible.
How does it look like? How do you feel? Do you feel the support of the other central banks in Europe? Do you feel the good vibrations for accessing and helping you out to access the EU?
Indeed. First of all, I have to thank once again Narodowy Bank Polski, your colleagues, for the support we received during this process. Also, we have very good working relations with other central bank in the region, also with the ECB and the European Commission, and definitely this support in delivering the technical assistance and in general helping us in the process of European integration inspires us a lot and helps us a lot to prepare.
Yes, because the challenge is quite well. Let me ask you if the overall challenge is big or isn't it big? Because there's several kind of reforms that are to be taken, and one of them is the law. The other is the central banking, the other is the economy, and there's also the social issues. And when it comes to adjusting towards the European values, what is your assessment on the Ukrainian society? Is the Ukrainian society ready to incorporate the European values nowadays, the actual nowadays European values?
Well, I suppose that actually the level of the EU membership is one of the highest in Ukraine if we compare ourselves with the other countries at the moment of the EU accession. And so there is no doubt that there is a huge support in Ukraine for European values and European standards, and we confirm that not only taking part in different surveys, but also during, in very challenging circumstances, including at the battlefield. So here I have no doubt that there is a huge support for the EU accession by Ukrainians. At the same time, we understand probably, at the level of the central bank experts and also the government representatives that there is a huge work has to be done in order to align our regulations with the European standards, and that will require the significant efforts not only from the officials, from the authorities, but that also will require the companies, financial sector institutions to change.